Imposter syndrome says we're not authors.
But here's our books.
And here's our podcast. We are two book nerds talking about our indie author experiences.
To spread the love of indie publishing and help other indies not feel alone.
Thanks for joining us, and now on to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Indie Book Nerds podcast. We're your hosts, Jade and
and Morgan Christensen. And today we're very excited to welcome SM Campbell, aka Seth.
Hi guys, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
SM Campbell is a self-published author writing primarily in the adult dark fantasy genre, with a heavy emphasis on punk themes and eldritch nonsense. Working full-time in the construction industry, Seth reignited his passion for writing after leaving the theater field and has since published 2 full-length novels in his Eldritch Depths series.
Starting with his first book, Corrupted Tides is a grimdark ocean punk fantasy. After the gods of the sea and earth left the world of humans ravaged, mortals live in floating cities. A strange corruption now threatens their existence. When the moon rises, the seas will change and nothing will ever be the same. It does include content warnings such as graphic, consensual, sexual content, graphic violence, hard-rated, R language, dark adult themes, substance abuse, and open water, which deserves a content warning. SM has also written a spice and language-free version of his main series.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Morgan. Well, Seth, why don't you tell us in your own words what your novel is about and when did it release?
Okay. That's kind of the nutshell plot a little bit. But I like to kind of market it as like Waterworld meets the Soulsborne games with kind of a Pirates of the Caribbean and Van Helsing aesthetic. So it's a like I said, world covered in completely covered in water. But what we're kind of discover through the series is what the mysteries are behind it. And so this is just the first book of 7. And so we're really setting up the main characters. And it's about the human stories on this water-covered world and the incursions that are happening. And so we see it from the ground level. And so while we're going to be exploring big stories and big themes, we're really focused on the main character Vila and the main character Nario, and then the other human and oceanid characters that we interact with. And it debuted December 12th of last year. So we're coming up on the book birthday.
Oh, coming up so soon. Yeah, that's definitely a way more in-depth analysis of your book versus what we've given that little blurb. I feel like there's so much more detail there, so many more cool layers and facts about it. Well, tell us what inspired your book.
Sure. So Bloodborne, essentially. I got really obsessed with Bloodborne about 7 years ago and just like dived into that game and deep dived into the lore. And if you're not familiar with it, it's a gothic horror game in the Soulsborne category of games, like Dark Souls, from the same studio. And you are thrust into this world and you're fighting big eldritch beings and nasty monsters. And I got obsessed with it and the lore and the way that the lore was told, and started watching videos online of this. I believe it's Vita. I'm probably butchering him, but he's a pretty famous YouTuber, at least in the Soulsborne space. And he had an art contest and asked people to basically pitch art for a Bloodborne 2, which is never going to happen. But he was just like, let's do this for fun, like fan cast a Bloodborne 2. And someone put Bloodborne 2 on the water, and they had like these big city ships. It was like Ixalan meets Innistrad, if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering. And so you had these big city ships and going around, and whale oil and things like that is a big thing. And you have the trick weapons, and so you have all the Bloodborne stuff, but then you set on the sea. And I was like, well, that's really cool. I would love to like make a cosplay of that. So I started kind of coming up with a cosplay of this, my own kind of world, with like these underwater monster hunters with trick weapons, and started designing basically, like tricorn hat, pirate guy with sea turtle shell shield and a spinal flail made from a shark, and was fully intending to make that into a cosplay. And then I started growing the lore of this world I'd created, and was like, ooh, maybe that would be a cool board game, because I'm also really obsessed with board games. And so I started actually designing a board game based on this. And so I had, everything in there, these gods and these eldritch beings that I call the deep ones, and these hunters called the deep wardens. And I'd actually gotten into a second play test of this game, still with like little cardstock pieces and whatnot. But it was just growing to the point that I was actually thinking about writing spin-off novellas if I ever got this game off the ground. And then my wife was like, why don't you just write the book? I was like, oh yeah, I guess I could. And so, I had all the lore, which obviously you have to adapt a little bit when you start writing an actual novel out of it. But I had all this lore. I had the magic system more or less worked out, and these monsters and creatures and kind of base story. So it was kind of easy then, just like, all right, yeah, let's just take that, and then what's the through line story? Who are the characters we're going to follow? And that's kind of how it was born. It started with Bloodborne, and then to Underwater Bloodborne, and to a board game, and then beyond.
There's a special place in my heart, I think, for books that were inspired by games. And I can definitely see how that led to what I think is a really unique and rich, premise that you've adapted it into. And it's really interesting to see what initially inspired that versus like the book that you ended up with, and to see how like that really sprouted from your love of games, like all these different games all played a part in, the book that you have today and the series that you have planned. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I've seen on your TikToks that you've even had some was it like contests about kind of including your readers. They were designing like weapons for the book, right?
Yes, I had a weapons design contest, and put that out there to see if anybody wanted to design some new weapons. And so I had some decent entries and a decent amount of entries in there, and so ended up kind of narrowing it down to the top four. And so one of them is going to make it into book 3, and then I've got one featured in the next coming novella. I already kind of know where they're all going to go, and some of them are even getting a little sneak peek into book 3, so they're just like already being integrated in the world. It was really cool, and the people who couldn't draw, there were so many people who are like, I can't draw, but they had like so many wild ideas. So I was actually getting more like written ideas from people. They were like, ooh, what about this and that? And so it was really cool to just see people kind of latch onto that and have some fun with it. Because that's been what's fun about the world, is that, taking that idea and like, how can we grow that into weapons and ships and cities, and, where does it spawn from? And so to see people do the same thing was really cool.
Yeah, well, I have a small history in 3D animation and character design, so I just wanted to put out there the that contest was really cool, and it brought me back to the 3D animation days where we would just draw and design things over and over again. So, just geeking out, and I was like, oh, that's so cool that he's doing that for his book. Um, well, Seth, what is your writing journey? What brought you to the writer you are today?
Yeah, I've always been a dabbling creative. Always, so I used to love to draw, and so I remember from early ages like drawing comic books and kind of creating my own, stories of things. And I used to make card games, so I would always, there was kind of this pattern. So kind of like what I said with the, taking Bloodborne 2 and making a board game. I was kind of always doing that, like, playing other card games and things, and think like, oh, how could I twist this and try something new? So I was always trying to create new ideas like that. But I was always kind of thought I was a little more in the visual world. Never really thought of myself as a writer, even though I was pretty good at it. And but I did actually, post undergrad, I wrote a book. I have a draft somewhere of a book a story that I wrote, but I never really, I didn't know about indie publishing. I didn't know I could do anything with it. So I just like wrote this book, and then eventually was going to try to turn that into a graphic novel. And so I really always kind of thought I was the visual person, that I was going to be more of like the artist side of things, until really when my wife suggested, getting back into writing, and saying like, why don't you just write it? Because I was doing like some blog stories and other things, and when you're creating worlds, you're writing stuff down. There's a writing element to it, so it wasn't like that far-fetched for me. I just had never really thought about like, oh, I could be a writer. but when but when she said that, why don't you just, go ahead
Sure.
and write the full story? I was like, all right, yeah, I'll do that. And it kind of just like felt natural once I got started.
Yeah, I can relate because, again, 3D animation, I had the big dream of going to Disney or working at Disney,
Hmm.
and took 3D animation classes, and it came with character design and stuff. So, but that, the art industry is like just as competitive as the indie
Oh
author
yeah.
industry, and or I guess the book industry in and of itself. Um, so I can totally relate. Writing kind of was always there and constant and just took that route instead. Pivoting over to Corrupted Tides, how did you come up with sea glass, and what was the most fun about making this a vital element, to the character's survival? And what was difficult to implement?
Yeah. So the sea glass came out of the board game idea. So, I was thinking about game mechanics that I could use. And so, what kind of power ups that would be sort of fun and natural in this world. And so, the sea glass and moon shards and kelp tinctures and all this stuff, those were all board game elements that were going to have specific benefits or negatives to your character and power ups. And so, I just really I took a lot of that and pulled it into the story, and then I had to kind of rework the lore and decide, how that was going to actually fit into this new story that I built. But it really was kind of born from that. And as I've kind of started delving into other series now and looking at myself as a writer, it's a very natural place for me to look at some of these things as my stories are kind of like board games and video games to me. Like I think of it in a very kind of item and mechanic based way, and it's very natural for me. So I'm finding a lot of similarities as I'm branching into other things. That there's a lot of these magic systems are very based in some sort of item that's particular to the world or some sort of element instead of just like a ethereal magic source. So it wasn't a far leap at all. So that's kind of where the sea glass came from. I can't tell you much more about the sea glass now because the lore of the story, there's a lot of spoilers as to like why it is and why it works the way it does. But there's essentially you have different types of sea glass and they all do different things. And you start them with these tinctures, and so you can put them in weaponry and you can put them in technology, and it's what powers this world. And so what started as a little board game mechanic of, a Deep Warden has a cool weapon and he puts a sea glass stone in there to make it more powerful, ultimately became the key energy source for this world once it was in novel form.
Wow, it's really
So
interesting to see how that evolved and how that changed. I know that you were mentioning that the magic in worlds it kind of revolves around like something like a magical element, and you have taken that and found so many different purposes for it, which I think is a really interesting and unique idea. Um, well, what made you choose some of the other elements in your book that you did? For example, you chose a secret cult, a heist, and the gods of sea and earth. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
yes. So the gods of sea and earth were born out of the board game. So the idea was that you were in this world. There was a sea god who ruled the water-covered world, and there would have been an earth god, but she was gone. And the main villains of the board game were the moon gods. That's not a huge spoiler for the book series because that's kind of changed and how that's all interwoven into the book series now. But I love taking religion and mythologies and kind of deconstructing them. So, I kind of loved having this idea of, um, we'll say like before the water flooded the world, that they were probably like in a dark age, kind of era of being, and so there would have been a lot of superstitions, and there would have been, maybe pantheons, and then this catastrophe occurs and the water rises up and people restart, and now we kind of find ourselves in like this almost like 1800s meets some more fantastical elements, and so but you still have the gods, but we're finding out who the gods are and what's kind of up with some of this stuff. And so when you have gods and you have religions and political schemes, you're probably going to have cults. And so there's a particular item that I won't really talk about here, but there's a cult that has a secret cult that is built up around that. And so because once I created that item and kind of knew what its importance was to the overarching story, it just made sense that there was going to be some other things connected to it. And so this kind of cult sprang up to that, and they have a deeper history with the world. And so just all of it kind of just spawns, once you create a thing, it just kind of spawns the next. Well, it's like, well, if you make that, well, that would probably lead to this, and you're going to have that. And so that's kind of where it all came from. And that all my stories have that. I love deconstructing pantheons and looking at religion through different lenses and belief systems through different lenses and kind of playing with it and challenging them to some extent.
Yeah, I love that you said that you like building religions. I know that when it comes to world building for fantasy authors, we can kind of get carried away, I want to say, but I also, as a fantasy author, don't believe that we do, because I feel like it's all relevant and we should put all of it in the books and find some way to use it. And that's where religion gets the most interesting, because you can learn to have your characters act a certain way, and it's so easy to explain it away by being like, well, that's what they believe in their religion. And it allows you to create this scenario in which people are acting in a way that we might not normally see them act, but it makes sense because now you've got this religion attached to it. And you can make all these really cool, wacky rules that you want, like cults, and you can just decide, well, now there's a cult, and it makes me really want to read your book. But pivoting just a little bit, tell us what your favorite scene or dialogue was to write.
Favorite scene from the first book, it'd be chapter 18. Chapter 18 is a pretty pivotal moment for the main character. She kind of allies herself with another character, and it's really the first like action scene of the book. There's some other scuffles and some minor I don't know, I can't remember what the word I'm looking for, but collisions, we'll say, of interpersonal matters. But chapter 18, we have a pretty big action scene, and we get to see one of the deboarded characters, and he's got this spinal flail, like it's made from the spinal column of a shark, and the jawbone is the flail, and he comes in swinging, and like it was fun to write, and when people read it, it was fun to read, which was a relief. But that was the most fun, and that's when I was like, really got to like stretch my skills and like really play with action and but not just action, but like action that's related to the plot and how to keep it interesting and also build character through that. And so chapter 18 was that was my favorite to write, and I still like to actually go back and read it sometimes.
It's funny that you say that. I think in my book too, chapter 18 is also my favorite chapter. Definitely not as action-packed as yours. Mine's a little more ooey gooey, and that's when they have like a little tense moment. But I do appreciate the pivotal moment at chapter 18.
Yeah.
I can see why that ended up being your favorite.
It sounds like it was, as you said, pretty fun to put all that in it and weave it through the action. And, it sounds like even your world building made it through as well. So it's like all of the elements of your writing just going through that one big moment, or, sounds super fun.
Yes.
What, to contrast that for you, Seth, what was the most difficult scene or dialogue to write?
It's hard to pick a particular scene. Dialogue's not super hard for me if I know like the purpose of the scene and I know where things need to go. It's hard to pick a particular scene in that book, so I'll kind of pick more of a combination of scenes. The heist scenes with Nario were kind of hard to figure out, and I don't. You should read the book. It's a good book. But I would love to go back and rewrite some, or like get better at heists. They're very, very difficult. And so it was very hard to kind of keep the momentum of the story going and create a believable heist and have moments that made sense of like, well, why would this happen at this point in time? And where are we at? It's been a day. What's happened in between? So it's very hard to kind of come up with a flow to it that also wasn't just extremely boring or too bonkers. So what I ended up coming up with, I think works, but that was kind of difficult to nail down. And then how the two stories, how Viola and Nario's story kind of end up interlocking, was pretty difficult. So I had these two separate storylines, they were going to interline, but how they got there was pretty hard to figure out.
Yeah, I would imagine a heist or like that's why I kind of like I'm scared of heists myself and mysteries and stuff.
Yes.
I'd be too worried about like I'm like the what if the payoff isn't as good?
Yeah.
And you know, I'm not sneaky enough to be able to do these things myself, so how am I gonna pull it off with my characters?
Yeah.
But as someone that does a lot of multi POV, I can relate with trying to like make everybody's storyline flow with each other to
Hmm.
still make it make sense and be entertaining.
Yeah.
Um, but that sounds really good. Corrupted Tides is already on the TBR. It's long been. Well, which character gave you the most trouble as an author?
Um, Honestly, none of them were particularly hard in that book. Um, Viola Viola's very complicated. She's a very, very complicated character because of her dual nature of um, her being a blue lady and also being a prize fighter. But I also found it pretty easy to get in her head. So she wasn't really hard there. Some of the characters are getting a little harder in book three because they're changing. And so like Nario was kind of difficult to write the third book because he was not where he started in book one. And so they're becoming a little more difficult. And then there's some characters in the later books they're a little harder. But those two, there's not a ton of characters in the first book, so that also kind of made it easy. And we don't get in depth with all of them yet. So I would say right in the first book, none of them were extremely difficult right off the bat.
Yeah, I think characters do get finicky and evolve. I'm starting to learn this as I'm writing book two. Well, you mentioned Vila. Tell us more. You said that she's a blue lady and a prize fighter. Well, what does this mean in the context of your book, and what do you think her biggest strength is as a character?
Yes. So a blue lady in this world is essentially she's a high-end escort. Um, I don't know what I can or can't say, but she's a prostitute, but like the higher end of it. So there's blue ladies and there's green girls. Green girls are the lower level of that. And some context to this, the city that she lives in is called the Planks, and there's an upper Planks, which is, floating above, and there's a lower Planks, which is essentially like the bowels of the ship. This giant floating city. And so you have this whole understructure, and it's pretty much lawless. It's kind of blocked off from the upper planks. There's a lot of political stuff about, controlling the lower planks. And so prostitution is not actually legal in the upper planks unless you're a blue lady. And so Vila is a blue lady, so she can actually travel between both worlds. There's some sordid history as to why she's a blue lady and her past. And so she does not like it. She doesn't want it, but she feels kind of chained to that life. And so that has driven her to become a prize fighter. So prize fighting is one of the things that is legal in the lower planks. And so she goes down pretty much nightly and beats the crap out of mostly men and releases a lot of inner turmoil and aggression in a very violent way. And it's her coping mechanism. And so that's what we'll kind of see through the books is how she learns to cope and grow in more productive ways. But in the first book, we meet her, she's just literally getting it out by beating it out, beating the life out of people. And so that's her kind of where we start with her.
I like her already. I love the idea that perhaps a prostitute is not the person you think of that would go on to become a prize fighter and wants to
Yes.
fight men. However, a highly justified choice on her part, if I do say so myself.
Yes.
I think it makes her sound like a badass. That being said, what piece of your story do you hope people connect with or enjoy the most?
Uh, I hope people connect with Viola. So she's divisive. She I think there, some people are like, oh yeah, badass, and some people are like, oh, I sympathize with her, but I question some of her choices. And if you read the book, you'll kind of see she's very dark, she's very damaged and divisive, but she is one of two POVs that are going to carry through all 7 books. And she's going to be kind of the beating heart of the story by the time we get to the end, or which she already is, but like she's very connected to a lot of things and is going to have, huge growth and impact on this world. So I do hope people, if you do find her divisive, that's the point, and that you jump in her story. If you don't find her divisive and you're like, I'm here for it, then great, because she's going to carry you through. But if you're like, I don't know about her, you stick with her because her part of the story is her growth. So I do hope people really connect to that. The other thing I hope they connect to is don't skip the prologues. Every prologue is from the same POV of this character named Yohulte, who is essentially the Cthulhu stand-in. And the first prologue doesn't really actually have a whole lot to do with the first story. Like, you can draw some connections, but every prologue basically builds the lore of the story. And so I hope by the time you get to the second book, you're really seeing that. And so, like, give the prologues a chance, because they're going to pay off in massive dividends by book 7. It's a long game.
Lining things up already
Yeah.
for your readers, I see.
Trying.
Yeah, some people don't really like the prologues at all. They're like, they're useless. Like, I've heard that's kind of a trend, and like even my book's prologues are like, it's supposed to set the tone, and it does the
Yeah.
thing, and it gives you a little bit of information. It means nothing to you now because it's in the
Yep.
beginning, but it's there most of the time for a reason.
Yep.
So, oh well. But no, yours sounds super interesting and deep. Seth, do you listen to music when you write, or is there any kind of like routine you have to fall into when you do write?
It varies, and it's kind of varied by book. Corrupted Tides being, the first book, was kind of establishing a routine for myself, and so I did write with music, and I kind of had to come down here, and I actually would turn the blue lights on and turn everything else off, and I would just turn on music to get in the zone. I don't have to do that now, but yeah, I listen to music, and so kind of the main group that really kind of almost became the soundtrack for it is Alpine Universe. I think he's Norwegian, and he does like kind of Nordic electronic folk, orchestral stuff that's pretty epic. And so his music was a lot of what I used. Now it kind of just depends on the mood. Now I'm kind of comfortable enough that I can I'll put my earplugs in, honestly, and just go sit in my bed and bust out some words. So I don't really have to kind of get into the routine as much. But when I do, I do have a playlist that I kind of put on, and it has some Alpine Universe and some other things in there.
Alpine Universe. That sounds almost right up my alley. I listen to a lot of different like Nordic and uh, Danish Germanic stuff, so
Oh yeah,
I
then
might have to give that
check
a
him out.
listen.
Yeah, absolutely check
Yeah,
him out. He's cool.
nice. I will have to put that onto my playlists. Yeah. Well, Seth, what are your publishing plans for the future, and what's ahead for your series?
Yeah, so I decided to, be hard on myself and make this as big as possible. So it's a 7-book series. I'm putting out book 3 here in late winter, and then I also have these like 9 novellas planned. Though I've kind of altered my plans a little bit, and I'm putting them on Kindle Vella now. So that's kind of helping me like spread out the process. So I'm in the middle of the second novellas on Kindle Vella right now, and I'm going to be putting the third one out when that one's done. And I do still intend to do all the 9 novellas, at least 7 of them. There's 2 that I'm kind of iffy on, but I do plan on doing those and putting them out. But yeah, I'm about to start book 4, but I have some other series that are, we'll say, they're connected to this world, but you don't have to have read the Eldritch Depths to have read these. At least the first couple of these series. So I've got 4 other series planned, and 3 of them you won't have to have read this one to enjoy. Though if you have, you will see the connections, and so you could kind of pick and choose which one to start with, and then if you read others, then you're like, ooh, I see what's kind of happening here, and then the 5th series will kind of be like, it's like the Avengers. Like, you will have to have read all of them if you want to know what's going on.
I need you to make sure that you back up absolutely everything you write, because now I need you to see this all the way through because I'm already hooked. I need all 9 novellas. I'm ready
Okay.
for all the lore. I'm ready to sit there with a little notebook and some post-its, and I'm gonna have it like all on the wall, and I'm gonna be like, and this series connects to the 5th series, which connects to the 4th series,
Okay.
and yeah, that's gonna be me. So you asked for this. I
Oh
want you
boy.
to know that that's what you're
I
doing
know,
to all
I
of your
know. I've
readers.
I've got some stuff to live up to. I have started the first book in the next series. It felt like time, so I'm going to have 2 series kind of going concurrently, and I'm looking at when I want to start the next series. It'll probably be sometime when these 2 are getting close to wrapping up. They might wrap up around the same time, just based on timeline. But yeah, right now we're on track, but we're still pretty early in it.
I love it. I really admire that. Well, one, that you're following that creative bug, because I'm sure that that's something we all get the pull towards. We're like, well, what if I just kept writing in this world that I love so much, and what if I did this? So I love that you're listening to the author crazies that are whispering in your ear.
Yes.
What made you choose indie publishing?
Um, well, again, my wife was just like, you can independently publish. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess you can, can't you? I just had never really looked into it. I just had no idea what you had to do to become a published author. But when she suggested that, then I did some research and kind of deep dived into some of that, and uh, just decided that was kind of at least the route for this first series, because um, I could just get it out there, and it also kind of helped me motivate me, like, just finish the book and publish it, and and then maybe you try querying later, which I did actually. I have queried now, and so I now have my rejection badge. I can state that I have gotten some rejection letters. Um, and so whether or not I will, I will still query some, but probably won't be this series. I will query some others. I think um, now that we're in this, I'm going to just stick with indie publishing for it because it works. I have full control, and there's a lot of things about the books that I really like to have that control. Like, I make my own maps, and I put world building in the maps, and I can put my world building in the chapter art, and I can craft my prologues and my epigraphs. And so for this wild, crazy world, especially now that it's branching off into other series, I like having that full control of that. I mean, there's going to be some other books I write that won't matter to me as much, and so eventually I might kind of go a little hybrid route, with different and kind of diversify. But for this one, it kind of needed to be this way. To connect it the way I want to and build it. It kind of had to be, and so it just was natural.
Yeah, we absolutely have to give a special shout out to your wife. She saw the genius in you, and she's like, "Sit down, get it out. It's all up in there." She saw it and she wanted it
Yeah,
to be fleshed out, and look at what it's turned into. So it's really
I
amazing.
know.
Now that you've
She
kind
re-
of
she re- she regrets it now.
I don't think maybe she does, but probably not. I'm sure she's like,
No,
look at
she's.
how vast his like world building is. Like, all of this was going on inside his head the whole
I know.
time, and now you're putting it out into the world. But now that you've dipped your toes into indie publishing, what does indie publishing mean to you?
Mm. It's very important to me now, because I've you know met a lot of other indie authors, which things I wasn't super expecting when I got into it, and just the people you meet and the connections you make, and how vital that is to indie publishing, to find that community. And I'm sure that's probably a pretty common answer, that this isn't really going to happen in early on without others kind of backing you up, like, and I've got found people who thought what I was talking about sounded cool and said, I want to arc read this, like, sign me up. And I've found some people who, really kind of sticking with me here, and have become good sources to throw ideas at and are supporting and marketing for me essentially, like, and it's really cool. And so yeah, now it has, solidified what I'm doing and my love for it, and is, very validating in that. And also then just, to have that community support, you just kind of have to have it. So
Yeah, and it is kind of a common answer. We all generally and genuinely like our community and feed into it and support each other and receive support. So yeah, it's a pretty it's a word. It's a pretty crucial thing that we receive as
mhm.
indie authors. Um, so Seth, you have changed your cover to keep up with a cohesiveness with each release or the next release of your series. Can you tell us a bit about how you handled this change? And do you have any advice for indies who might have to do the same thing one day?
Yeah, so how that came about, because I haven't really talked to all the details on social media, but I was working with an independent cover designer, and he essentially announced that he was not going to be doing covers anymore. And there's some more to the story that I don't really want to get into, but it just became clear that, like, I might probably wouldn't have him potentially going on. And, I'm approaching book 3 and needing a cover, and got 4 more after. And it was very uncertain. So I went ahead and just made the decision to kind of, say it's time to move on. And, uh, and so I ended up switching. And so I went with, for the new covers, I went with MIBL Art, because um, they they have a whole staff behind them. They can meet my timeline, which was something I was struggling a little bit with my previous cover designer, was keeping up with my fairly quick release schedule. And they can do that. And so that was very, very good. And so I sent them a line and I got a concept, and it just worked. It was like, this is amazing. I can absolutely see the rest of the series doing this. So, it happened pretty quickly. Easing myself into it was pretty easy. It was like, made the decision. Now I just got to make a game plan and move with it. Transitioning everybody else has been, just kind of like making sure people kind of know enough of what they need to know, and that this wasn't a move based on, you know, greed or special editions, or that this is going to keep happening. It's just, this is an unfortunate event. We're going to just do it. We're going to move on and go from there. But there's a lot of cascade effects that have, that happen because of that. So the main series now is fine. Like, we're going to move through and we're going to use MIBL art, and it looks great. And I'm going to probably continue to use them for other series as well, because they have a lot of great options. But I have cleaner versions, right? So I now have cleaner versions of the books, and I don't want to pay for more covers for those. So I'm now making new covers for those. And I'm also going to now be making covers myself for my novellas. And so that's been a little challenging, of figuring out what am I going to do with some of these other things outside of the main series. And it's also just kind of made me look at my indie author business and how I want my business to run. And so the decision to switch to Kindle Vella for my novellas helped, because now I can, make just smaller cover images, and then eventually I can turn those into larger covers. So I'm not spending as much time and money on those. I'm also now, like, I'm not offering cleaner versions as signed copies anymore, because it's just, an extra expense, an extra time that wasn't worth it. So this kind of helped that. So now I'm just going to make a clean, simple, easy cover and put those on Amazon and just call it a day. And so ultimately, the cover thing kind of all came full circle with other things I was thinking about as an indie author, and how I wanted my business to look, in the future. And it kind of helped me solidify those decisions and just kind of ease into, you don't have to do all the things. And so that would be some of the advice that I would give, is that there's a lot of things you can do as an indie author, a lot of different publishing routes you can take. and a lot of different people you can work with, and you don't have to do all of them. And I think when you're on Book Talk, sometimes it feels like you have to do all the things, and that's not necessarily the case and may not be the best route for you. And the other thing I would, well, no, we'll call it there.
Okay.
Okay. No, no, please give us more. Um, but yeah, no, I agree. Because it is it's a business venture, and I know
Yeah.
a lot of us, we really want to be in it for just the writing, but there's a lot more involved if you want it to, um, you know, reach anybody. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, unfortunately, is a business venture where you do have to make those decisions
Yeah.
and, take a different route when something isn't working anymore, or, just always trying something new.
Yeah.
But your covers look really good, even if, they have different artists. Um,
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really happy with them. I've loved working with MIBL art, and I think they just look stunning. And
they
so that would be what I would kind of say to people as kind of a warning or just something to be thinking of, like when you're looking for your cover, especially if you're going to have multiple books in the series. I didn't think about the fact that I might not have the same cover designer. That wasn't something that was on my mind. I signed up with him and it just didn't really cross my mind that that might not be the case. I'm thinking, oh, okay, I've got my publishing schedule. I'm looking to finish my series, probably in the next 3 years, and 3 or 4 years, I'll just continue working with him, and that didn't happen. So that would be, I think, just think about if you're going to work with an individual, maybe get a contract that signs them up for multiple books, or maybe you look at a company who has the infrastructure in place to work with you on that and on your timelines and stick with you for your whole series. But just kind of be aware that there are going to be things like that are going to be come out of nowhere, and you're going to have to adjust and potentially adjust quickly if you want to keep it moving.
for sure. And I don't know if it, because I call them Mibble art, and they did my cover too. Um,
Oh,
and
okay.
I think they even, yeah, I mean, I could be wrong about that
Yeah.
pronunciation, but they did my cover too, and I think they also have like series packages where you can
Hmm.
just have all of your books, um, all the covers for the entire series, at once. I know I couldn't do that, but they do
Yeah.
have like a decent turnaround time and a bunch of artists and
Yeah.
different art styles that you can pick from that fit your budget, and they're super cool.
Yeah.
I love them.
Yeah. I've
So,
I've loved I've loved working with them. They've been great.
yeah, they have. What are your biggest obstacles when it comes to publishing the book? So like after your books have been written, did you encounter anything that slowed down like a publishing process?
Um, cover was one of them. I had on that first cover, I had to wait longer than I wanted to, and so I was getting my cover kind of late to get things plugged into Amazon and Ingram, and so that's not the case now with MIBL art, because I can get it a lot quicker and earlier. But before, yeah, I was coming down to the wire because I was setting myself a release date and a schedule, and I wasn't quite getting the things that I wanted, needed at that time. So that was kind of slowing stuff down. And then, yeah, you just have, all sorts of stuff that, like, yeah, I had to learn new format. I had to learn new programs. So I had to learn Atticus, and how to format my own book and get it into the format to meet Amazon's requirements and make sure your cover actually fit when you put it in there. And I was doing a dual publishing with Ingram Spark, and so you've got to make sure it's loaded up there. And at one point, one of my files just randomly got corrupted, like it had been published, and like a month later, nobody could order my book off of Ingram Spark because the file got corrupted. I have no idea what happened. So, but they didn't tell me, and so then I had to like go upload a new one. When one of my friends was like, "Hey, this link isn't working. I can't buy your book." I was like, "That's weird," and I emailed them and found out that the files were bad. So I was like, "All right." So that stuff has just been, obnoxious dealing with the companies and how to like get stuff in, and all the hoops you got to jump through with some of that, and then you got to learn keywords and like what keywords to put, like all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
There are so many different hats to wear when you're an indie author, and nobody tells you
Yeah,
that at first. You think it's just the writing, but now you're also a marketer, and you're also the troubleshooter, and you're also,
yeah,
the assistant running to go get coffee 10 times for yourself because you got to stay up and
yeah,
figure out what's wrong with your file and why isn't it working. So
yeah.
I've definitely been there. So, what is your best piece of advice for people who want to self-publish that you wish you would have known ahead of time?
It kind of goes back to what I was saying a little earlier of that, especially when you jump on Book Talk and you start to see a lot of other indie authors and things out there. Just really look at you. You've got to look at yourself as an indie author as a business, and you need to develop a business plan. You have to not just like what style am I writing in, and when am I going to publish my books, and what social media am I going to use to market them. You need to decide what business route you're going to take. Are you going to push, full hard into Amazon, or are you going to try to become the next Book Talk bestseller? Because you've got PR boxes and bookmarks and in-person events you can do. You can go with Ingram Spark, you can use Book Vault, you can go with Amazon. There's just so many things, and it can be really overwhelming. And I tried to do a lot of them, and I spent money in places I shouldn't have, based on where I want to actually be now. And so I would say, just before you publish that book, sit down, write a business plan, and look at what the options are available out there, and what routes you actually need to follow to follow that business plan. Maybe you don't need to do PR boxes, or maybe maybe you need to do them for a little bit, but then you're going to shift. Maybe Amazon isn't the route for you. Maybe it's this, maybe it's this, or maybe you want to do hybrid. But just before you just write the book and put it out there, write an actual business plan, and then look at all the strategies available to you and decide which ones don't make the cut.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's amazing advice. When you first approach being an indie author, I think sometimes it's not always an intentional decision. Sometimes we write a book and we
Hmm.
are now faced with, well, what do I do with it? And we
Yep.
eventually stumble into indie publishing, and now we're figuring out, okay, well, how do I get it into the world? And that is unfortunately also the time to create a business plan and figure out
Yes.
what's ahead for you. I completely agree. Well, speaking of what's ahead for you, do you have any future goals or upcoming events or releases that you want to mention?
Yeah. So I don't really have any in-person things. At this point, I don't have the ability to travel, so you won't be catching me at any cons upcoming. But hopefully that'll change. So I'll definitely let people know on that at some point. But yeah, I've got book 3 in the Eldritch Depths is coming out. I'm looking at a late January to early February release. I haven't quite pinned the date down just yet. I'm kind of waiting on the cover and get through some edits here and kind of make sure I'm on that track. But book 3 is coming out, but you have to have read books 1 and 2. Like, this is not a series you can kind of jump in. It is linear. So you got to read 1 and 2. But if you have, or if you've been interested, the pirates are actually showing up in book 3, and so we've got some really cool stuff developing that one. So I'd say check it out. But next year, if things go on track, I'm releasing the first book of my next series. The next series is called The Eldritch Dunes, and it is, I don't know what else to call it, but a dark Western punk fantasy series. So it has all the things I love in there, the punk values, but in a Western themed world with weird monsters and item based magic. And I'm going to be releasing the title of that here in the next few days, the first book. And so that one is coming out next year, and I think it's going to be, I'm really excited about it. So be on the lookout for that one.
We need more Western fantasy.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, can you remind everyone where they can buy your book and any of your social media handles?
Yeah, so you can get my book on Amazon. And so the first book is in audiobook, ebook, or print. And then the audiobook for the second book is coming out here pretty soon. So Amazon's the main place. And then I do always sell signed copies on my website. So if you like it and want to get a signed copy, you can get them straight from me there. And I put in bookmark stickers and reader goodies. So that's where all of that's in my link tree if you follow me on my socials. But then, yeah, I'm on TikTok. I can't remember my handle. I think it's Seth Campbell Writes. But if you search up pirate book guy, you probably find me too. But then I'm also on Instagram, and it's the same handle, but I think there's like a dash between the names. And then you can find me on Facebook, but I'm not doing much there. And so really TikTok and Instagram are kind of my two biggest. And if you find those, then I have a link tree on each of those that takes you to anything else that I've got going on.
Yeah, yeah. And as always, we do tag everybody on our Instagram that we have for IBN, so they can also find you that way. Thank you so much for being here, SM Campbell, for an amazing interview. Next week, you'll be able to catch Callista Neath, author of Invoking the Blood, here on the Indie Book Nerds podcast.